Two former Brazilian presidents, both accused of running an organized crime ring. Will the charges against Lula da Silva and Dilma Rousseff ruin their self-proclaimed party for the poor? I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmaker is Brazil's Workers' Party. It's been an anti-corruption investigation called Operation Car Wash. The aim? To find out whether members of Brazil's Workers' Party are dirty. In a 230-page document, former presidents Lula da Silva and Dilma Rousseff were accused of organized corruption during their 14 years in power. The Attorney General's office says the activity was broken down into 4 sections: political, economic, administrative, and financial. All of it was criminal, and all of it was controlled from the top by the former leaders. So, is the Workers' Party really a criminal organization, or are the prosecutors taking their orders from Washington and Wall Street, as the Workers' Party says they are? We begin the conversation with Randolph Nogel.
To understand him and his appeal is to understand where he came from. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, the 7th of 8 children, didn't learn to read until he was 10. The boy who was once forced to drop out of school to work, shining shoes and selling peanuts, became Brazil's president in 2002, known now affectionately as Lula. His unlikely ascent was made all the more remarkable by those he brought with him. Millions of Brazil's poorest rose to the ranks of the middle class during his tenure.
Eu quero estar abraçado, lado a lado com o povo brasileiro para fazer as reformas que nós precisamos fazer neste país.
The party he co-founded 2 decades earlier as a union leader, the aptly named Workers' Party, was the first major socialist party in Brazil's history. It would go on to dominate politics for the next 14 years. Until, of course, it all came crashing down. For 3 years, Brazil's political establishment has been overrun by a series of corruption scandals. The largest by far was a pay-to-play scheme involving the state-owned oil company, Petrobras. The Workers' Party was dragged into the middle of it with allegations it funneled bribes to pay off politicians and buy their votes. The Petrobras scandal has acted as a match to the flame in which virtually every corner of Brazil's political landscape has been exposed for corruption. Lula's successor, Dilma Rousseff, was impeached last year in a separate graft probe, ending the Workers' Party's run on power. The man who replaced her, and who helped orchestrate her removal from power, Michel Temer, narrowly escaped a corruption trial last month when the lower house voted to spare him until his term expires at the end of next year. And now Lula himself is facing a near 10-year prison sentence if a court upholds his corruption conviction.
Se alguém pensa que com essa sentença me tiraram do jogo, podem saber que eu estou no jogo. Pode ser.
Nosso candidato é Lula, é o plano A, B e C. Nós não temos outro candidato. Avaliamos que uma eleição sem Lula é fraude.
Lula has announced his intention to run in next year's presidential election. And despite his conviction, it's clear he is still loved by many of those who supported him from the beginning. At 71 years old, he just finished a 3-week tour spanning 3,000 kilometers to whip up support. But with a lengthy prison term looming, Lula's fate could determine the political future of the Workers' Party. And in a context of endemic corruption, the only place he and his party may find retribution is at the ballot box. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now in the studio is Consul General of Brazil in Istanbul and former Ambassador Paulo Roberto França. From Recife, Anthony Pereira, director of the King's Brazil Institute. And in Belo Horizonte, Márcio Coimbra. He's a political coordinator for the Federal Senate of Brazil. Gentlemen, lots to talk about. Really looking forward to this discussion. I thank you all for joining us. Paulo França, the Attorney General filing those charges against the big guns in the Workers' Party, a criminal organization, this is what they're being called. Does that sound accurate or ludicrous to you?
I think that the level of corruption and fraud that has been unveiled in Brazil is unprecedented. Never in the history, not only in Brazil, but in a democratic society, such a level of corruption has been discovered, has been unveiled. So I think that what has been done through the work of Lava Jato Car Wash is that a number of documents, a number of testimonies, a number of elements, emails, bank transfers, have been put together to uncover this criminal organization. Corruption has been endemic. It has grown to a level, as I said, unprecedented. And of course, it's in the interest of Brazilians that all this be investigated, and of course, those that participated in criminal acts be punished.
Hundreds of millions of dollars involved here. Anthony Pereira, we're talking about $500 million in bribes in several public entities, corruption, money laundering, cartel activity. Is the Workers' Party corrupt?
I think it's good to contextualize it, though. As the Consul General was saying, corruption has been going on for a long time in Brazil. The corruption of the Workers' Party involved a coalition of parties, so not just it. And it's fairly traditional in a sense. It's sort of kickbacks for contracts and for illegal campaign financing. And I think what the Consul General said is very important. The scale of the money diverted that's been revealed by the car wash investigation is really staggering. And it's money that could have been used for education, for health, for infrastructure. So that's why I think it's such a serious issue. And in my view, car wash itself is not necessarily capable of changing the incentive structures in Brazil so that politicians and company executives are no longer corrupt. I think there does need to be complementary political reform.
I tend to hear, whenever I cover the story, from those who support Lula or Dilma, is they say, well, that might be true, but everybody's corrupt. They're all corrupt, including Temer. Now, is that a cop-out, or is there some truth to it that the entire political institution is a corrupt one?
Your question is really good, because what happens in Brazil is that our political system looks broken because the corruption scandals, they begin with the PT, with the Workers' Party, but it goes along with other parties, reaching the PMDB, who is running the country right now, the PP, and some other parties. Even the opposition is involved. So our entire political system needs a reform. Now in Congress, we're discussing a reform in the political system, political finance for the campaigns, barriers that could exterminate some parties that we have, like more than 28 parties that are with seats in the National Congress of Brazil and the House of Representatives. So we need to make a deep reform on Brazil institutions in order to finish with the corruption scandals in Brazil. We began some years ago with the PT, with a state called state capitalism, where our government would put money on private companies to generate some champions of our economy. And that went really wrong because it began a large scale of corruption in our institutions, in our biggest companies.
Let me ask you, Paulo França, is it helpful that Lula is on the campaign trail now? He's just completed his 3 weeks in the Northeast, called it the Caravan of Hope tour, as we heard in the report as well. People love him. He was a great president for many millions of Brazilians, or tens of millions of Brazilians. People love him. He's he might go to jail for 10 years, but that doesn't matter to a lot of people who absolutely love him. Is it helpful that he's on the campaign trail?
I think that this is a political move, in my view, because, of course, he needs to remain alive, and he needs to shake up a little bit the situation in order to put the Workers' Party in this trend towards 2018. Many people say and speculate that, in fact, the Workers' Party is preparing someone else to present itself as a candidate, to be presented as a candidate. The problem with Lula is that even though he is a very charismatic, very important leader, nowadays he has a rate of rejection which is very high as well. Many people say that, in fact, what is happening with him is that he has like a ceiling in terms of approval. And he would not overcome the ceiling because the rate of rejection is very high.
Is Lula's ceiling the same as the Workers' Party's ceiling, Paulo?
It's around the same, but I think Lula, as I said, as a charismatic leader, goes a little bit beyond the Workers' Party. But as I said as well, nowadays he has been linked with all these crimes that have been done in Brazil, and the scale of corruption that has been unveiled by car wash.
Yeah, when he was convicted in July, I spoke to a member of his defense team, lawyer Valeska Martins. In July, here's what she had to say to me. Have a listen.
This is an innocent man, and as an innocent man, he deserves to run. The people of Brazil are the only ones who may judge him. Democracy is the only rule that may be applied now in Brazil. But we cannot accept.
But Judge Sergio Moro did judge him. You're appealing, but he did judge him.
Keep on attacking the rule of law.
No, he did judge him. He's a guilty man. He's appealing it.
Well, he's not a guilty man. Moro found him guilty, and this is something that we foresaw in July of last year when we filed an appeal before the Human Rights Committee of the UN. They are following the script, and I even feel sorry for Judge Moro that he had to convict Lula on such a weak basis. It will be revised in history, and it will be revised internationally. It is a shame, and it is a shame on the rule of law for Brazil.
Anthony Pereira, when she told me they are following the script, what do you think she means?
Well, I think there's a part of the Brazilian electorate that believes that the judgment of Sergio Moro was more political than legal. I haven't read the judgment. I'm not a legal expert, so I can't comment on that particular aspect of the case, but I think there is a part of the electorate, especially those people sympathetic to the Workers' Party, who believe that there's something of a double standard here. I think, as you were saying in the interview, he will appeal. The judgment will probably take place in Porto Alegre before the registration of presidential candidates. So we're likely to know about Lula's eligibility to run before the presidential election next year, and that might force the Workers' Party into a post-Lula future. And I think that's one of the things that the party is dealing with. How do they transition to a post-Lula future? Do they make broad alliances as they have in the past? Do they open up the party so that it's not run exclusively by people from Sao Paulo? I mean, one of the things that was really different about Lula's second term, as opposed to his first term, is that he lost a lot of middle-class support between the 2002 and 2006 election. So if you look at who voted for him in 2006, it was far more the poor and the less educated. And that created a polarization in the electorate that really hasn't changed. That was continued in 2010, 2014 elections. So that's another issue facing the Workers' Party. Does it try to build a broader base of support for itself, or does it remain exclusively representing that lower end of the socioeconomic ladder? And that's difficult for it because it means that a lot of the opinion makers, middle-class opinion makers, the media, are against it.
Yeah, all great points. I mean, it's clear that the Workers' Party, because of all of this, is on the ropes. Marcio Coimbra, they're on the ropes, they're defensive, they're in trouble. Now, here are some of the strategies that they've been using. They've been talking about Moro being on a witch hunt. Now they're talking about Rodrigo Llano, the prosecutor. He's also on some sort of legal witch hunt. In a statement last month, they said, quote, "In the country of the coup, the big decisions are made in Washington and Wall Street, and the order given is to sell and loot Brazil." Marcio, this is clearly a strategy, right? They believe everybody's out to get them. The prosecutors and the judges are bought, and that Washington and Wall Street are pulling the strings. Is this going to resonate with a portion of the electorate who will believe that and see truth in that?
I don't believe so. I believe that Lula's image it doesn't look very good to the electorate right now. People do not have anger against Lula, but they do not believe him. So I think they use this strategy of saying what is happening, that it's a hunt for the PT. But, you know, we can see a lot of other people, former members and members of the PT, who have been caught and are in jail, that are talking. Their finance minister, Antonio Palocci, last week gave a huge deposition to Judge Moro, unveiling everything that is behind the scenes, saying that Lula had an account with Odebrecht with more than $300 million. Mm-hmm. And this is a lot of money. We're talking about a lot of money. And Odebrecht is not the only company. There is more. Senator Delcidio do Amaral from PT, who also went to jail, also have given strong proof against them. And they say that everybody who is caught and everybody who talks, now it's on the other side, is playing Judge Moro game. That's not true. These people were caught and they're trying to cut deals and are delivering everything that is behind the scenes, all the corruption scandals, all the money laundering, all the dirty money that is behind their campaign and their government.
Paulo, let me ask you a personal question.
Yeah.
As somebody who represents your country, it's a great country. You're representing it here as a consul general. You're a former ambassador. You're a diplomat. As Operation Car Wash sort of unfolded and the details started coming out, the millions of dollars, the tens of millions of dollars, the people involved, did you find it more and more embarrassing in trying to still represent this image of your country to the world while all of these sordid details were coming out?
Yes. Well, I said yes as an immediate reaction because, of course, it's difficult and it's painful. But at the same time, I think I have to be very proud of Brazil because what's happening in Brazil is something that as well is unprecedented. Car wash is doing a job that no other country has done in history. We have in Brazil nowadays, because of corruption, ex-ministers. Marcos Coimbra just mentioned, Antonio Palocci was one of the most important men in the Workers' Party. He was Minister of Economy. He was Chief of Staff of Dilma Rousseff. You have the Speaker of the House, who is in jail and does not belong to the Workers' Party. And then car wash cannot be accused of being rigged.
Right.
You know, you have some of the most important businessmen, such as Marcelo Odebrecht and other ones. So I think that this is something really unprecedented, very important, and which is establishing, I think, a new step forward for Brazil. I think we needed that in order to strengthen our democracy, to strengthen the rule of law, because all these lawsuits, all this investigation is happening with due process. People has had enough possibilities to defend themselves.
Right.
So I think it is a very important example. And internally in Brazil, we needed that. As I said before, it's painful, it's difficult, but at the same time, it's something that if you look forward, it's very positive. Let me just mention a sentence that I like very much. John Fitzgerald Kennedy said once that a crisis, the word crisis in Chinese, is made of two characters. The first character represents danger. The second character represents opportunity. So I think that's what's happening during this very difficult crisis. We have a huge, important, and positive opportunity to moving forward, strengthening our democracy, strengthening rule of law, and beginning to work in terms of politics with new standards of ethics, of rules of the game. I think this is a very important element forward for the future.
Right. Democracy is messy business, but when powerful people are held to account, I guess you can say democracy is working. Interesting times in Brazil. Going to be interesting to see what happens with Lula on the campaign trail and what happens when the High Court decides on his future. And we'll be watching the future of the Workers' Party very closely as well. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure talking to all of you. Paulo Roberto França, Anthony Pereira, and Marcio Coimbra. I thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Still ahead, Catalans celebrate National Day despite Madrid's decision to suspend Catalonia's referendum on separation next month. And detained for a Facebook post is Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas tightening his grip on rights activists. The leader of the Catalonia region in Spain says he still plans to hold a referendum on independence next month, even though the poll has legally been put on hold. Last week, the Constitutional Court suspended a law passed by Catalonia's parliament that allowed the vote to be held. The Spanish Prime Minister, Mariano Rajoy, had called the referendum on independence an intolerable act of disobedience. With just weeks until the vote is supposed to be held, some of that disobedience, or is it independence, was on display as hundreds of thousands of Catalans took to the streets to celebrate Diada, Catalonia's National Day. Sandra Gatman has more.
La Diada, Catalonia's National Day, commemorates the fall of Barcelona to the Spanish crown in 1714. But this year, it's got new branding, La Diada del Sí, a rallying cry to vote yes in next month's referendum on independence. To Spain's government, the vote violates the Constitution. In 2014, a symbolic referendum resulted in 80% of voters backing independence, but less than half of eligible voters took part. This time, Catalonia's president, Carles Puigdemont, says a yes victory will lead to independence within 48 hours. The region's parliament has already approved new laws laying out the terms for an independent Catalonian republic. Hostility between Spain and the Catalan state reached new highs this week. Spain's Prime Minister, Mariano Rajoy, asked the Constitutional Court to suspend the vote.
Esa consulta, por más que se pretenda imponer de forma atropellada, chapucera e ilegal, no se va a celebrar.
And judges agreed, ruling to put the law that authorized the vote on hold. The Spanish government has even gone further, threatening separatist leaders and mayors with fines and suspensions from office. Over the weekend, a print shop was raided by police looking for ballots. Some analysts say Madrid's hard line might actually be fueling support for the separatists.
Many Catalans have really broken their cultural and mental relationship with the Spanish state. Not with Spain, not with the Spanish society, but with the Spanish state.
Indeed, the latest polls suggest a strong majority of Catalans support the right to determine their future. But the numbers also suggest most people would say no to independence. What's unpredictable is whether the vote will even go ahead, and whether the Catalans can go it alone if they succeed. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this further, I'm joined now from Barcelona by Javier Nart. He's a member of the European Parliament who represents Spain's Ciudadanos party. Also in Barcelona is Oriol Amorós. He's the Catalan government's Secretary for Equality, Migration and Citizenship. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Oriol, let me begin with you. You have a big day today, the Diada, thousands of people on the streets. Is it a day of celebration or protest?
Well, it's a day of commemoration and it's a day of reivindication of freedom. So it's a day where we want to say to the Spanish government, to the world and to ourselves, it's at the same time that we are ready, that we are prepared, that all we want is to decide by the best way that the things could be decided, which is with ballot boxes, with ballot papers, and giving the people the right to vote their option they prefer.
Javier Nart, should the people of Catalonia have the choice to vote on breaking away?
Well, the tragedy in Catalonia is that when they speak about Catalonia, they think that Catalonia is them. And Catalonia is all of us. First, in the last elections, the voters that were against separatism were more than the voters for separatism. They did the elections calling them a plebiscite, and they lost. But they said that in accordance with a law in Catalonia that gives more seats to the rural areas, it doesn't matter how many people voted against, because they were more in the parliament. In the Catalonian parliament, to change the, let me say, the statute, that is the constitution, as you can call, of the region of Catalonia, you need 2/3, but they are scarcely majority, and they made a shortcut in order to achieve what they say, the right to decide. That is something that it doesn't exist in the legality, international legality. That's why, in the international context, they have no followers, no backing, no government, no one is backing them. They are inventing something and dividing society in two. The actual, the holiday of today, the celebration of today had to be unity for all the Catalans, and they have transformed it in a sectarian thing. And this is very, very sad indeed.
Okay.
To break society is the worst thing and the last thing you have to do if you're a politician.
So let me give Oriol a chance to respond. A lot of accusations against you, Oriol. Have a go.
Yeah. Yes. I like that Javier Nart used counting the votes as an argument, because this is the final argument. So if he feels so sure that they have majority, why they don't allow us to vote? Because the self-determination right is a right well recognized all over the world. And of course, the Spanish diplomacy is pressing all the governments in the world. But you can go, for example, in the House of Representatives in London, in British Parliament, where they had made a document speaking and analyzing the facts and saying that the best way to solve the things is let people vote. He talks about, he counts the numbers as they want, but clearly in the Catalan Parliament and among the voters, there is a clear majority in favoring the right of people to decide. Mm-hmm. There are some polls that talks about 70%, other 80%. It doesn't mean all these people want to vote yes, but it's not important for me. People has the right to say yes or has the right to say no, and we will respect the result. And that's the key point. About the accusation of dividing society, of course, plural society have different opinions in different ways. In my family, there is people in favor of independence and people against. But this is not a problem for us to live together and in a democratic society to have different point of view. For example, I met Mr. Mart some time ago. Maybe he can remember that in the parliament, and we had a nice talk in different issues. So we think in opposite ways on this point. But in a democratic society, when you have different point of views, and I like he used the argument of counting votes, because this is the key point, and I agree with him in this point, not the way he counts, because I think he's a bit tricky, because he's counting people who's in favor of the right, and there are some parties who are in favor of the right to decide, but they don't say yes or no, because they have members of both options. And if you really count the last elections in Catalonia, who were in favor of independence, were 49%, and who were against 39%. So it was a normal election with other issues on the table. So now, if we want to decide on that, we have to vote yes or no. And we go ahead to let people decide, let people decide freely.
And that's what you want. Madrid doesn't want you to have the vote. Let me ask you, Javier, we have the Prime Minister Rajoy saying, quote, this is an intolerable act of disobedience. Madrid is taking all legal means by suspending the vote, political means. You've got newspaper offices raided in Barcelona, right? You have Barcelona itself not wanting to give voting centers and 6 other major population centers with populations of over 100,000 not wanting to host the vote. With all of this in mind, isn't Madrid, by its actions and by its tone, going to push people who are on the fence into the hands of Oriol and his friends, because Madrid is treating these people as if they're children?
But excuse me, don't speak about Madrid and Barcelona. I am in Barcelona, I am Catalan as Amorosky is, and I mean, it's a clear thing. I mean, there is a heavy divide, a great divide in the Catalonian society. So, for example, if they say that the right to decide that as an invention is a nicety, right to decide is the way to disguise self-determination right, and in accordance with international legality, and Catalonia is not in the moon, it's in the planet Earth. Self-determination applies only to countries under colonial system or with an intolerable repression. I mean, let me say, any country that has an intolerable... And do you think that Catalonia has an intolerable repression when the government is a separatist government, even that they are in a minority backing from the people? I mean, the right to decide is a full nicety, and I give you an example. For example, if they go for the right to decide, they will find a divided society. So, for example, in Barcelona, we are going to be against, fully against. In the north of Catalonia, I am sure it's going to be heavily for. So we are going to divide Catalonia in two. Why? There is not the right to decide to Barcelona city, or to Tarragona, or to the main cities of Catalonia. The right to decide, they say, no, this is in the Catalonian context. And I say, no, it is in the context of anyone. And so Spain is a free country, and Catalonia is a free country. It looks like they have never voted for it. I mean, the main problem is that they have fear to the elections, but to the good elections, with a constitutional elections, that means that the people that are going to be present at the tables of voting has to be neutral, not their friends as they are going to do now. And they have to be, let me say, a census, and not the census that we don't know what is it because they have hidden it. And we have to have, let me say, a legal body to observe elections, and not the friends they have put and nominated directly. And of course, all of this gives to a point. When they approve the law, you can say they approve by a scarcely minority in the parliament, the advisors, legal advisors, that they were named from them, but they are legal people, they know what is law,
so
they were not followed when they say it is an illegal law.
Okay, so let me bring in Oriol here.
La Corte Constitucional, what is the Constitutional Court for statutory rights, they have no the possibility of saying nothing. So it is, let me say, we are more seats and we decide the law. And this is the most near thing to, let me say, a coup d'etat.
Okay, coup d'etat, very, very powerful words. Oriol, let me ask you, you have Javier taking offense to the fact that I framed it as Barcelona versus Madrid. He says, in Catalonia, you have a divided society. And I guess some of the polls can back him up when you look at the polls. I'm very hesitant to quote polls after Brexit, after Donald Trump's win. But nevertheless, let me quote you a poll from July. The poll said 49.4% of Catalans are against independence, 41.1% support it. The rest are sitting on the fence. Doesn't that tell you that the people of Catalonia are extremely divided, and this could go either way? It doesn't have this majority that you're claiming.
Well, I don't think this poll is right, but if it was, it never happens. It's no problem. If people vote no, I will accept that. So, of course, there are different opinions in Catalonia, but there is a central point where there is a big and huge majority. Some polls say 70%, other polls, the main polls say 80%, which is about the right to vote. So there is a big majority, a huge majority who wants to vote. And this is the key point. And then if they vote yes or vote no, I will accept that. And we will accept that. And our president of Catalonia has said that if the no wins, he will resign and he will call on to elections. So this is the perfect democratic way to solve the things. And I ask to the other part, are you going to accept a majority in favor of independence? This is the key point. And all the other things are just blah, blah, blah.
Okay, so
just talking to talk. Because in a democratic society, certainly, of course, there are different. And I want to say other things.
Okay, finish your
point.
Two
other things, please. Just to answer some statements of Javier. First, of course, Javier, and I agree with you in this point, you are as Catalan as me, and no people has no doubt around this issue. And of course, all the Catalans, those who vote no, who don't vote, or who wants to vote yes, has the same right, and their opinion has to be listened and listened carefully. Another thing, this morning, the president of Javier's party, Ciudadanos, they were over there, a microphone open, and probably he didn't know, just said that they cannot stop the votation on 1st October. This votation is based on law, of course. It has all the guarantees that we can give to this votation. And the only problem with this votation is the Spanish government is putting as pressure and as problems as they can.
Okay,
they are threatening civil servants. They are threatening our suppliers. Okay. They are entering in a press industry.
Certainly,
where they thought the ballots were printed there. They are entering in the media.
Understandably, and it seems as if the central government is doing all it can to stop it happening. Let me ask Javier. Javier, if it goes ahead, do you trust the president of Catalonia, Carles Puigdemont, to let it go, to put it away, and to say we lost and we'll move on now? Because that's what they're saying. They're saying, let's put it to a vote, and if the people vote no, we move on. Do you trust them?
This is the most grotesque, dangerous, and terrible thing. When they say, we are going to the streets, so they don't go for what is the pillar of democracy, that is doing in accordance with the law. I mean, these people, these separatist people, these, let me say, selfish people, they think that the country belongs to them. And if you look to the international context, because up to my opinion, up to my knowledge, Catalonia is in Europe and Europe is in the world, no country has supported this, let me say, so-called right to decide, or this absolutely undemocratic approach from the separatists. So it is quite interesting to realize that it's not a question of Madrid attitudes, that's the law. And it's not the question of the Spanish government. It's all the governments in Europe. The President Juncker has said that Europe will not accept a separatist movement in Catalonia against the law, as well as the President of the European Parliament. This is the product doctrine since many years ago. So at the end, if you look to them, they look to themselves and they think that the small personality they are is the core of the world. And the world is broader. They have got no support from anyone. And it's not because of the pressure of the Spanish diplomacy. It is because there is an international legality that they make a joke of it. That's it.
Okay. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Two things to watch: whether the vote actually goes ahead and how it will turn out if it does go ahead. We'll be in touch with both you gentlemen, Javier and Oriol, in the next few weeks as we build up to October 1st.
Can I say a last word, please?
Okay, in 15 seconds. In under 15 seconds, if you can, because I have to wrap.
No, I just want to let know to Javier that Scottish has voted, the Quebec people has voted, and there are 29 new countries in the 20s of last century in Europe, and all these countries has made referendums. If you ask to the Norwegians what a referendum is, Norwegians has voted. And the Finnish has voted. And the Letonian has voted, and many people has voted in this world.
I've got to move on.
The Catalans just want to do what the Norwegians do in 1905.
That's fantastic. Mr. Amorós, Mr. Amorós giving the doctrine of the European Union. Wonderful. I want to finish. Long life a united Turkey. and long life a united Spain.
Okay, gentlemen, I've got to move on. I hope we'll have both of you back on the program very soon. Oriol Amoros and Javier Nart. It's been a pleasure talking to both of you. Thank you very much. Human rights groups say they're concerned about a media crackdown that's taking place under the Palestinian Authority. In July, President Mahmoud Abbas introduced the electronic crimes law without any public consultation. Since then, journalists have been arrested for as little as taking a photo of the president's convoy or posting remarks on Facebook, calling for Abbas to step down. Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Ramallah by former Palestinian chief negotiator Nabil Sha'ath. He now serves as an advisor to President Mahmoud Abbas on international affairs. Also in Ramallah, Palestinian writer Mariam Barghouti. Thank you both for joining us. Mariam, let me begin with you. They've just released him, but the charges are still not dropped. Tell me what the detention of Isa Amru means to you, because the guy just wrote a Facebook post and then he was arrested. What does that mean to you?
Right. So the detention of Isa Amru comes under this new electronic crimes law that's been released by the PA by presidential decree without the approval of the Palestine Legislative Council. And he was detained over basically a post he had on social media. And it shows you the levels that the Palestinian Authority has gone to suppress Palestinians from freedom of expression, from freedom of speech, from criticizing this very authority that's becoming more and more authoritarian by the day. And this kind of police state is beginning to show its tangible face these days. And Isa Amru's case is emblematic of this. He is a human rights activist and defender against the Israeli occupation. And now he also has to deal with the suppression of the Palestinian Authority that claims to represent the Palestinian people. And more sinisterly, it claims to represent Palestinians in the international community.
Okay, so Nabil Sha'ath, is the PA running a police state, and are they being authoritarian by throwing people in jail for Facebook posts?
The Palestinian Authority is not a police state. The only police state that exists in Palestine is the Israeli occupation. That's the police state. That's the settler colonial regime. That's the oppression of every day. Now there is a Palestinian Authority, and the Palestinian Authority have some authority, particularly in the cities, but the Israeli occupiers overrule. Now, there is so far there has not been any law that governs the speech in the social media. The social media, of course, has expanded and has become significantly important in Palestine. But once in a while, you have a complaint that goes to the courts that leads to a certain action taken. In this case, really an action taken against the wrong person. Isa Amru is a patriot who really worked very hard against settlements and against the settlement colonial policy of the Israelis. And in fact, when he was jailed on violating this law, I think there are dozens of people went to complain about this, and the president intervened and ordered him out of jail. But the court to which the first police ruling went considered that it needs 4 days to adjudicate the case. Immediately after that, Isa Amru has been released. The courts were eventually convinced that he was innocent, and he was released. Now, this does not happen every day. And in fact, when it does happen, it elicits a lot of resistance and a lot of action to stop it. And it does stop, and there are means of stopping it and releasing Isa Amru, so he is back in his patriotic duty in Hebron.
Mariam, do you take any comfort from hearing any of that?
First of all, I completely agree that the first and foremost perpetrator on the Palestinian people is the Israeli colonialism. However, that does not alleviate the Palestinian Authority from the crimes that is enacting on the Palestinian people, and it does not alleviate it from criticism. Secondly, the Palestinian Authority is a symptom of Israel's settler colonialism. It is an occupation inside a colonization, and that is a problem we have to tackle. Secondly, Issa Amro was released after people mobilized. Is it really necessary for people to mobilize and keep telling the Palestinian Authority that what they're doing is wrong? Issa's case went into the international eye. He had the privilege of people speaking out. However, other Palestinians, journalists and activists and civilians alike, do not have that privilege. What happens to them?
Nabil Shouth, what happens to them? What happens to Fadi Aruri, a photojournalist who works for the Chinese news agency Xinhua, summoned for interrogation also because of Facebook posts, because he was told it could lead to disorder in society? What happened to a radio station director, Ayman Kawasmi in Hebron, also locked up? I mean, so this is not just one guy. And then you have this electronic crimes law. It sounds as if the noose is tightening and closing in on freedom of expression. And as Maryam says, it sounds as if you're enforcing the occupation on behalf of the occupiers. Tell me that's not true.
It is not true. This is really rubbish, because you are barely trying to remember, and if you really go into the records, you will find 2 or 3 names. This is not something that happens every day to everybody.
Amnesty International says the PA is conducting arbitrary arrests, violent interrogations, confiscation of equipment, physical assaults, and bans on reporting. Are they making it up also?
It's not a question of making things up. It's a question of exaggerating the authorities' blame when it does once in a while interfere in its way, thinking that this keeps law and order and stop an attempt to create real problems that the Israelis can utilize to say that the Palestinian Authority is not able to maintain the minimum amount of order, and that gives them an excuse to do more action against the Palestinian people, more oppression of the Palestinian people. I think it's grossly unfair to compare the Israeli occupation with the Palestinian Authority. It's grossly unfair, and it covers up the crimes of the occupation, and it gives people an occasion to run away from the real victim and the real oppressor. The real oppressor is the Israelis. And if there are violations by the authority, this violation has to be stopped, and it can be stopped. The proof is Issa Amro.
So Maryam, why are you exaggerating, which is playing into the hands of the occupation?
We are not playing into the hands of the occupation.
This is constantly the excuse that is used. Mr. Nabil, please let me speak right now. This is the excuse that is constantly used against Palestinians, that we are exaggerating, that we are making this up, that we deserve what is happening to us because we are disturbing the peace. And this is why this is sinister, why it is awful, with the Palestinian Authority that is supposed to protect Palestinians has created this new path where it does security coordination with Israel, where it appeases Israel. Just right now, Mr. Nabil Shad, you said that, the Israelis will say, look at Palestinians, they're not orderly. That is not the discourse that we have to fight. We have to fight all the discourse, that the Israeli settler colonial context of supremacy and inferiorizing Palestinians is what we have to fight. So no, as long as you keep pointing at another oppression to alleviate the Palestinian authorities, then we will never be liberated. Right now, it is settler colonialism that we have to fight, but the Palestinian Authority is not fighting it with us.
Nabil Shouth, you have a young Palestinian woman who lives in the occupied West Bank debating you here. Convince her in under a minute. Tell her why the PA, tell her why you still represent her and her political aspirations.
We represent her far better than leaving her to the Israeli occupation. We have not surrendered to the Israeli occupation, and the resistance in Jerusalem and the support for it by the authority and the continuing attempt by the authority to corner the Israeli occupation and to go all over the world to fight its crimes is the proof that the Palestinian Authority is not the Israeli occupation. It's the absolute contrary to the Israeli occupation. Now, we do sometimes make mistakes, and when some mistake is done, when some injustice is done, when some unfairness is done, you will find hundreds of people who go to the authority and succeed eventually in taking away the injustice. I think if we really are able to regain our authority and our unity, then we will be able to regain our parliament. And when we regain our parliament, there will be a real control over the executive authority. I am for freedom of speech. I am for freedom of people to express their rights. But please do not compare the victim with the criminal. The criminal is the Israeli authority. And if you make that mistake, you make it very hard for your people to fight the occupation.
Maryam, are you willing to give them a chance?
To give the Palestinian Authority a chance?
Yes.
That will happen only when they join hands with their people. They're people that have been in the streets. When Al-Aqsa went down, the only reason the Palestinian Authority joined hands is because that was the only choice. But when that's not the only choice and they join hands with the people, then we can give them a chance.
Nabil Shaath, what's your message to the international community when they look at the situation in the occupied West Bank and it seems as if the Palestinians can't really run themselves properly? Forget Gaza, forget Hamas. They look at the occupied West Bank and they see people imprisoned for Facebook posts and they go, well, why should these guys have a state if they can't even run their own society properly and democratically?
You continue to exaggerate, and this exaggeration really makes things rather bizarre, because that international community, if it cannot see up till now what the Israeli occupation are doing to us, if that international community is not capable of implementing international law on the Israeli occupation, don't tell me that they then should forget about the Israeli occupation and concentrate on the mistakes of the authority. This is a total miscarriage of understanding and of justice. The problem here is very clear. We are the last colonial program in the world, the last apartheid system in the world. That's what the people should look at, to try to make them look the other way around when the authority, which is doing its best to end that occupation, makes some mistake, is absolutely erroneous and contrary to what we should do as a people together.
No, but I do thank you, sir.
Order to fight
I'll tell you why
occupation.
I thank you. Because we reached out to many PA members, a lot of people who in ordinary circumstances would defend President Mahmoud Abbas, who would defend the PA. We reached out to our entire list of people. Nobody wanted to touch this topic because they disagreed with Abbas, they disagreed with this law, and they felt very uncomfortable defending it. So, as my final question to you, sir, how do you feel about that? That all the PA supporters were saying, we don't want to talk about this because it's too hot to touch and we feel a bit embarrassed by it.
That is not the issue. The issue is when you have a cancer in your stomach and in your head, you do not go about crying to the world that you have a little pain in your toe or that you have a little temperature at your head. We have cancer and you are talking to me about a night cold. You exaggerate, and by exaggeration you cover up the real fact. The real fact we want democracy. Look, Amro is a patriot. Right. Amro is an activist. Amro is somebody that has all my respect. And I am one of those who went to the president in order to release him. And I was not alone. There were many people who went to the president and went to court.
But why did you have to do that in the first place?
Because we do not have full authority in our land. Because we are still under occupation.
Israel didn't,
because we are divided into two countries.
Sir. You arrested him, not Israel.
Is what?
You arrested him, not Israel. You have the control.
I already. Come on, you are forgetting to see what we are going through. I am for democracy. I am for freedom of expression. I protest.
Settler colonialism. That's what we're going through.
No.
And that's why we have to fight it. But when the Palestinian Authority security coordinates, we can't.
No, you can fight it, and you know how to fight it, and you know what the Jerusalemites were able to do. The Jerusalemites did fight it, and they succeeded.
Okay.
That's because they concentrated on the enemy, not on the brother.
Nabil Shaath and Maryam Barghouti, I have to move on, but I thank both of you for joining us on the program. It was important to have this discussion. Thanks so much for joining us on the Newsmakers. And that's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Gavda. Next time, we'll ask if India's army chief is preparing for a war with China. Until then, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.